Lauren.
Sheriff Billy Woods says people can't blame guns for killing the three teenagers. Instead, it's the young criminals who he says are not held accountable by their schools or society. Here's what we know this morning. Police are still on the hunt for a third suspect in the teen-on-teen murders that left two juveniles in handcuffs, 3 dead, and 1 on the run in Marion County, Florida.
Some of you know him, you know where he is, and you need to turn him in. Now, I will get him. I will find him, and justice will be completed.
The victims are 16-year-olds Layla Silvernail and Camille Quarles and an unidentified 17-year-old male. Investigators say Silvernail was found shot on the side of the road late last month. She was taken to a hospital where she later died. About half a mile away, police discovered a 17-year-old boy with a fatal gunshot wound. The next day, a third victim was located inside Silvernail's car that was partially submerged in a lake. Police say at one point the suspects were in that vehicle before they shot the victims. The sheriff has not decided if he will charge the suspects as adults or not, but he believes they deserve the maximum penalty. The youngest, now in handcuffs, is just 12 years old.
12 years old.
Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you.
And you have to believe that sheriff is feeling it from both sides. I mean, that's his community that's rocked, but now he has to deal with, investigating a 12-year-old murderer. Mm-hmm. And that's where all that emotion's coming from. Well, it's like, while you're over here worrying about blaming guns, I've got a community that has fallen apart over this.
Yeah, and he is speaking it plainly. Here's Sheriff Billy Woods of Marion County saying we need to hold kids accountable.
The fact is, society fails it. We do not hold our juveniles accountable. We minimize their actions. I am a father. But here's the one thing my boys know. Growing up, the freaking barber had my permission to whip their school districts across this state and across this nation need to quit minimizing the actions of their students. Hold them accountable. That's where the failure is.
Well, you had it.
And every word that man just got through saying is 100% on the money. Because whenever we was growing up in this area, I don't know about California, don't know about New York, don't know about Florida, don't know about Philadelphia, don't know about all those other areas, but around here, we liable to get our butts torn up just as quickly by a neighbor down the road as we did by our own parents. And sometimes, depending upon whatever that we had done, whenever we let the cat out of the bag, that so-and-so and so-and-so wound up getting huffy with us and wound up having to whip our tail, regardless whether it was the principal, a school teacher, or a bus driver, we learned how things was handled around here in this area to the degree that if you did have a confrontation with one of the adults, you kept it to yourself. Because odds are, whenever you got home, you liable to end up getting another whipping for getting the first whipping. Now, that's the way we was raised. Now, there's no doubt that I talk a great deal about child abuse, and I talk a great deal about post-traumatic stress disorder that a lot of our military people have come over from various wars and have gotten. And there's no doubt, if people want to be honest with themselves around here that knows our family, they know that my dad took the discipline, parenting tactics extremely way too far. Of course, at that time, in this area, it was acceptable. But I promise you, if we would have been raised up in Chicago or out in California or in other places of the world, and somebody would have known that those children was being dealt with that way, somebody would have went to jail. There would have been a truant officer at our front door. So there is a divided line in how far too far is versus how far not far enough is. Well, that's what the American people have got caught up in. They have went from one extreme to another, and I've said this before on some of my other material. They have went, especially in this area, to the degree that you can whip your children, and as long as you keep air in their lungs, as long as they're still living, ain't nobody gonna say a word to you. We went from that type of atmosphere to the atmosphere that now you can't even talk down to them or degrade them in any type of way, because if you do, that's going to cause psychological damage, and the next thing you know, little Johnny's liable to wind up killing somebody, and because he killed somebody and they found out that you talked down to little Johnny, a hotshot attorney is going to say, even though little Johnny deserves punishment to the fullest degree, some hotshot attorney, along with some hotshot psychological psychiatrist, is going to say, well, you can't do that. That's dishumane. You can't bring capital punishment upon little Johnny like that because his parents talked bad to him and he peed in the bed. Well, you know what? I peed in the bed too. I pissed in the bed. Matter of fact, I pissed in the bed one time up in Chicago. I think I was about 4 at the time. This was right about the time that it was either right before or right after. I think it was before that my grandparents come up there to stay with us for a night or two, and I was forced to have to go sleep with my brothers. They had an electric blanket, and guess what? I peed in the covers under the electric blanket, and I wound up shocking all of us. Well, I got the crap beat out of me by my 2 older brothers. I got slapped around. Well, that pretty well taught me not to pee, especially don't pee in somebody else's bed, especially don't pee in or under an electric blanket, because up north, that type of atmosphere and having electric blankets at the time was pretty predominant. So, everybody has peed in the bed. That's my point. Everybody has peed in the bed. So what? They peed in the bed. So what? Somebody talked down to them a little bit. Out of 90% of the whippings that I got, I appreciate those whippings. There was about 10%, maybe a little bit more, but it was spread abroad all over my whole family. It wasn't just me that was being treated that way, but it was my 2 older brothers and my younger brother too, and my mother that was being emotionally, physically, verbally abused, that caused scars in the family that went so far that basically the only way that my brother knew how to escape it or to live with it was start being an alcoholic. He had the same choice that I did. He could have chose towards going to the cross and humbling himself before the churches and praying, God, help my dad. God, help my parents. God, do this. God, do that. It got to the point that my father was so possessed or indoctrinated by his own ideals, he basically gave up towards anybody coming and talking to him about the Lord, including the Jehovah Witness. There was a guy down the road here by the name of Bill Warren. He decided to raise his children up by the Jehovah Witness, and they didn't believe in the pagan holidays and didn't celebrate Christmas like everybody else. And because of it, everybody around here accused him that the only reason why that he become a Jehovah Witness was because he was so tight that he didn't want to give his children any type of Christmas. These people around here will judge you. They will judge you, they will condemn you, they will categorize you, they will compartmentalize you, while the whole time they themselves is doing the same thing or something just as wrong. That's called a hypocrite type state. And I'm pretty sure it's probably that way across the board all over America in some form or fashion. It may not be quite as bad in one area that it is in another, But now they're fixing to talk about something right here pertaining to what Vice President Harrison jumped on board pertaining to the Tennessee disciplining actions. And there's another thing that I want to talk about before I talk about that, is that the media in Tennessee is not freelance media. And the reason why I say that is because if something occurs to the point that they can shut it off or shut it down, they'll do just exactly that. That's just like whenever I first started preaching and I had the apocalypse model made in the back end of my truck, and I started going up here at the radio station, but I was working up here at Jimmy Atkins, old man Wooten's nephew, in a body shop up here in Dresden, and within about 4 sessions, speaking on Sunday mornings, and basically I was just telling people how that God had given me the knowledge of interpreting the Bible. Wasn't trying to force nothing upon nobody. But then all of a sudden, I was asked to either give up my position on the radio station or seek employment elsewhere. There's another event that I'm going to use for an example that recently come up. I think it was in Middle Tennessee, where some sheriff must have got really, really rude or bold or any of the above. I don't know what. But anyways, there was a teenager involved. I think it was a male. And he wound up doing something to the teenager rather than hold him down. I think he actually got physical with him. And they put it on the news one time and one time only. And then after that, you never heard nothing about it. You know why? Because the legislation in the state of Tennessee are still predominantly run by old thinkers, by old ways, by old laws. And whenever it comes to them being a prejudiced state, they have been a prejudiced state ever since the Civil War. They have never gotten over the Civil War, the majority of the people. They still want to cling to their old authoritarian ways as far as the white superiority race, kind of like the Aryan brothers. They don't want to call themselves Aryan brothers, but they still want to hold to those same endearing ideals. And like I told somebody yesterday, I said, you know what? I've been living here since 1967. I've never seen a black mayor in Greenfield. I've never seen a black mayor in Gleason. I've never seen a black mayor in Dresden or Martin or Union City or Dyer or Kenton or any of the above. Now, I've seen recently policemen that they have allowed to come on board, and the state troopers started doing that probably about 20 years ago. They're looked more upon in the statehood than they are local counties. But I have yet to see a black judge in Dresden, Tennessee. I have yet to even see a black attorney. I'm pretty sure there's probably time to time one of them may pop up that maybe is hired from Memphis that winds up in the courtroom. But as far as seeing a predominant black attorney in Weakley County or Union City or the surrounding areas around here, I haven't seen one that I know of. I may be speaking out of turn to the degree I just didn't catch it. But the bottom line is this: the state of Tennessee has been a prejudiced state ever since that I was knee-high to a grasshopper, of how that they wanted to continue to put the black man or the black woman in a different position than what they was in. I mean, the person that I was talking to yesterday about all this, he's a little older than me, and he goes all the way back to the point of whenever the blacks had to go in one bathroom and the whites went into another. And he asked me, he said, what was he afraid of? Was they going to catch cooties? I said, I have not an idea. I said, the cemeteries was the same way. I said, I was in Lynchburg, Tennessee, back about 3 or 4 years ago, and there was a black guy standing out there, and he hollered out at me about something, and I stopped. I listened to what he had to say. He said, how come they still bury black people on one side of the road on that cemetery, and the white people on the other side of the road? I looked at him, I said, sir, I don't know. other than the fact that it's old thinking. It goes beyond tradition. It goes beyond heritage. You can call it heritage. You can call it tradition. But the bottom line is this: it's not heritage. It's not tradition. It's hate. It hadn't got nothing to do with tradition or heritage. It's got to do with hate mongering. And to this day, you will still find not only the whites that don't want to participate with the blacks, but you will basically find the blacks that still don't want to participate with the whites, especially whenever it comes to different things. Politics is one of them, and church is another. Usually around here, you got your black churches, and your black churches all have black attendants. Your white churches all have white attendants. Now, you can go to certain churches like the Jehovah's Witness, and they're black and white. It don't matter if they're in Northwest Tennessee or Tennessee at all. There are certain church groups that steer around prejudicism, but this state has been one of the most difficult states to break through pertaining to the message that God had given me 30 plus years ago that I was basically demonized and dehumanized because of. So whenever I say things that I say, whenever there's horror that hits our great land, in which I hate it that it does, trust me, I do. I hate it with all sincerity, but at the same time, I have to be able to stand in the corner and say 90-90 boo-boo, I told you so, that it couldn't have happened to a better group of people, because right here in the Bible Belt area is basically where the core of origin of where the problem began, going all the way back into the Reagan era of a group of people that was not going to have somebody like me telling them about the Bible and how to interpret the Bible and how that we're supposed to live by the Bible. And to be quite honest with you, I don't think it would have mattered. I think if I would have been whoever, it wouldn't have mattered. I know this, that whenever recently Priscilla Presley, I think, is it Priscilla Presley, Elvis Presley's daughter that wound up marrying Michael Jackson, the people in the state of Tennessee thought that was the most disgraceful thing that they had ever heard of or seen in their entire lives. In their entire lives. Why was that? Because they had been indoctrinated by that same rule of law that began during Nathan Bedrick Force during the
you have a child that's this young that is
during the Civil War days that they had never let down, they had never given up
of anything. But this sheriff is right. We must start holding these children accountable. You know, the Department of Justice put out numbers that showed that arrests for violent crimes went down 67%. Will, I don't believe that. And the only reason why they did is because now when you go to these communities, they don't arrest these kids. You go to these schools and these SOO officers don't arrest these kids because they don't allow them to anymore. These kids that you see were fatherless. There's too many kids that were fatherless in our streets right now, harassing and devastating our communities.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I was in the break room before our segment in the last hour with Lauren Green, and we were talking. I don't think I'm talking out of school. This is it. Like you're dealing with symptoms if you don't deal with the disease. This is it. Fatherlessness is at the core of the issue, to be honest. We're talking about, in America, period. In America, period, fatherlessness is a problem. In Black America, it is a very widespread, acute problem. 70% of kids in fatherless homes. You won't fix anything until you fix the home.
But we denigrate marriage. We denigrate, frankly, we talked about the denigration of the Bible and the morals that the Bible espouses, and we denigrate religion in general, and then we wonder why we're having this spiritual crisis, because ultimately that's what's at the heart of this. It's 70% in the Black community, but the Hispanic community has really high numbers,
society-wide.
and society-wide.
Exactly right.
And interestingly, it's infecting the lower classes more. It seems like the elites in Hollywood who sort of, started with denigrating through their culture, and what they put out there, denigrating marriage, celebrating, their values. They seem to get married at higher rates, and the people suffering
Charles Murray wrote a book about
are
this
the
called,
lower class
called Coming Apart, and Hollywood and the elites all emulated this, and he put it out and glorified like the divorce culture, and then didn't practice it.
Right.
And the lower socioeconomic levels are the ones that took it up, and it just destroyed so many of the places where Joey's from and I'm from, where those rates are much higher.
We talk a lot about race, but really class is at the heart of so much of
J.D.
this.
Vance, his entire
Elitism.
elegy is about this, the white plight, the things that have affected Appalachia and other regions. This is something that many cultures within our culture are experiencing. But here's the thing, I'll leave it with this. I know that we need to move on. I come from the military community, and I can't tell you the men that I know that eventually took their own lives because they felt like they were letting their family down. In a lot of ways, it was because they had children that lived 5, 6, 10 states away. The guilt that men carry for not raising their children isn't worth not raising their children, much less the legacy it creates of a child without a father becoming someone who's a detriment to society. It is never too late. Reconnect with your children. Make the hard decision. Don't choose career over family. They'll be there for the rest of your life, and the rest of theirs, you'll be there for them. Reconnect with your kids if you can. Don't carry that guilt. Don't leave society on the hinge like that. Don't leave your kids out without a dad like that. Go do it. Go reconnect. There are organizations that help. If you're a veteran and you're struggling with this, go to bootcampaign.org. Get help and reconnect with your kids. It'll be a lifeblood for the rest of the successes you're looking for and you're not feeling.
It's a fantastic message, but also a message we need to give to our lawmakers, because there's a lot that our government does through policies that incentivize men not to marry the mother of their children, and there's a lot of financial incentives for women to remain single, and all of these things end up hurting society at large. So a lot to talk about. We're going to turn now to your headlines. The Justice Department launching an investigation into a possible leak of classified documents. First reported in the New York Times. Posts popping up on social media of what appears to be U.S. security secrets related to Ukraine, the Middle East, and China. This comes hours after the Pentagon announced it will investigate a leak of what appears to be plans, a Ukrainian counteroffensive. Slides detailing sensitive details on China, terrorism in the Middle East, and maps of the war in Ukraine leaked on Twitter, Telegram, and other platforms. Vaccines for cancer and heart disease could be ready by 2030. That prediction made by the chief medical officer at Moderna. Clinical trials are...
See, that's what happens whenever you have a Wild Wild West show and all of a sudden you bring in something that you thought was the best thing since the manufacturing and the design of toilet paper, okay, pertaining to the internet and social media platforms and smartphone technology. Now there's stuff leaking out there that should never have been in the hands of the wrong people, number one, and number two, it never should have been put on social media to begin with. And the more that we do stuff like this, the more that we're telling not only our enemies abroad, but even our allies, that we are basically just a bunch of people over here that don't know what we're doing. And whenever you reach that state, that psychological state, it's the same way is what the insurance companies used to deal with whenever I was in the auto body industry trade, and all of a sudden an estimator would quit, or somebody would get fired, or something would happen in the office. They didn't really take so much interest in what was happening on the floor, but whatever was going on in that office, they took interest of. And whenever there was destabilization going on in that office, they backed away and they started putting more of their work towards all the other body shops, and gave that one time to give them a little breathing room to figure out where they actually stood on everything pertaining to dealing with them with the money.
Next.
And basically our allies and our enemies are going to look at us the same way. Well, why even deal with them? Because basically they're unstable, and they don't know their head from a hole in the ground, and because of it, we're just going to back plumb away from them. We are putting forth all these different images, and I've said this many, many times before. I support disciplining your children, I really do. But I don't support beating your children. I don't support doing psychological damage to your children. Okay? For some reason, America has always swayed as far to the right as they do the left. They're extremists. They're extremists. And the bottom line towards who come over here is your big conglomerates back in the 1800s with your colleges and all your smart people, and all of a sudden they started promoting these ideals in people's heads. Well, why don't you just get this insurance, and why don't you take out this, and why don't you do that, and we'll take care of you. It's kind of like what the government told the Native Americans back years ago: give up your guns and we will take care of you. Well, now they've given up their guns and they're still not taking care of us. So we have obviously been lied to. That's the reason why I continue to say again and again and again, their ideology, their whole concept has caused basically the State of the Union to fail us. And we're seeing that on a day-to-day level. I mean, I'm all for humor, but there comes a time whenever you got to draw a line in the sand and say, you know what, this really is not the area that we need to be joking around in or playing around in, because this is a very, very serious matter, and not just disciplining our children, but all the gun violence. So that's what we're fixing to go to right here. We're fixing to go to, I think it was the vice president that they was talking about a while ago that coming to Nashville pertaining to the three amigos or something like that.
Government essentially saying, we're taking over the car industry.
You think, so Brian, can they do it? To Jackie's point on the price, I think an average EV is like 65,000, an average gas is 26,000.
Compact gas.
Don't tell them what the Lightning is, the Ford Lightning.
Yeah, it's like $80,000.
Yeah.
So the point is, we're going to make gas cars more expensive. Now what they're doing is saying, we're going to give you subsidies for EVs, but we're only going to give you subsidies if the materials are mined in the U.S. or with a trading partner. But guess what? They don't approve any mines in the U.S. So the point is, there are going to be fewer cars available for these subsidies. The bottom line is, you can't drive an EV, you can't drive a gas-powered. So what are you going to have to do? Move into the city, right? You got to move into an urban center where you're going to be on the bike or the train or the bus. And the idea is take away your autonomy. Cars are a form of autonomy. The big government left doesn't like that. So the less people drive, the more they got to be under the thumb of government control.
Taylor, I want my question to be, can this happen? Because the great pushback seems to me to be, well, consumer demand. Consumers don't want EVs. They want gas-powered cars. But to Brian's point, they're just going to price you out of it. At some point, it doesn't matter what you want, it's what you can afford.
Tesla's probably our one exception, where I think they've now cut prices 5 times this year, but that's to help spur demand. I think for me, when I think about the rollout of this, we often talk on our program about putting the cart before the horse. So why are we mandating EVs when we don't have a national infrastructure rollout plan of a charging center? So where's the national charging station? And so we just want to mandate EVs, and we don't have a plan in place to fully properly support that. And don't even get me started on the grid that isn't properly equipped, definitely in my California, to support all of the EV charging.
Which, by the way, is powered by fossil fuels.
Right,
exactly. And let's talk about the batteries, the mining of these EVs. All that supply chain is super dirty. So if you want to say EVs are clean, what about the cobalt, the nickel, the lithium, all of that mining that's coming in outside the U.S. that's super dirty?
It's dirty and it's controlled by China.
Exactly.
And so,
either in China or through their colonial interests in Africa and everywhere else.
Right.
Yeah, so it's outsourcing our power to China.
Yeah, we're handing over our competitive advantage basically and say, here, China, you dominate the economy for the next 5 decades while we impoverish ourselves to achieve a goal that we're never going to achieve.
Can I make a point, just a really quick point, which is I think that this administration and the progressive left is willing to sell us out to China or whoever else to basically change the fundamental formation of this country and change the politics of it, to move from this capitalist system to a socialist system. Cars are only one cog in the wheel when you think about it.
I mean, think about the role that fossil fuels have played in America's self-determination and world power, and we're going to hand that over, that future, to China. Tell me, I don't know if you guys will be talking about
Not only that, of what they're talking about pertaining to the battery-powered cars, but also, I mean, the fact of the matter is, China is not convinced that global warming even exists. The way I understand it, they're still in debate towards thinking that it even is a real concept pertaining to reality. Things are so displaced right now since the past 30 years has went by compared to the old way of thinking, and the old way of thinking at one time did work. um, that worked for a while during that time, during that generation, but now it's not working, and if people aren't willing to conform and evolve, then they're going to be left behind. They're going to be left behind, or possibly maybe even hurt emotionally or even physically. It's really sad. Now listen to this excuse pertaining to the Afghanistan ordeal. Listen to this.
There were children being killed. There were people hanging off of Air Force jets that were leaving, and you're saying that you guys are proud of the way that this mission was conducted?
I don't. Nobody's saying that everything was perfect, but there was a lot that went right. So yeah, there's a lot to be proud of. For all this talk of, I just didn't see it. Not from my part. It was tough in the first few hours. You would expect it to be.
Sorry about that.
Administration saying there's a lot to be proud of in its review of the Afghanistan withdrawal, but the 12-page summary repeatedly placing blame on Donald Trump, saying in part, President Biden's choices for how to execute a withdrawal from Afghanistan were severely constrained by conditions created by his predecessor. Here with the reaction, former Taliban negotiator and senior Trump administration official, Adam Bowler. Adam, thanks for joining us. There's a lot of ground to cover here, even within just 12 pages. So give me your take.
This is all based upon the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing, is what they're talking about right now, towards what Donald Trump put in action that obviously Biden's administration didn't work out the wrinkles towards, and they let time delay jump up on them. I guess it was because of COVID or whatever, but you know, a president is only as good as the cabinet members and the body that he puts around him. And if he's not smart enough to hire the right people and get them in place to where they can be basically the whistleblowers, or you know, the eyes on the other side of the wall towards telling the president what needs to be done, then basically this government is too big for one person to run and run effectively. They basically only use the president as something like that you'd put on a mantle for everybody to look at. He's basically just a puppet.
On what Kirby had to say, which is there's a lot to be proud of, not a lot of chaos.
I'll tell you what I am proud of, which is our U.S. military response. And when you look at the issues here, it's because things were decided in glass towers. At the end of the day, if you look at what happened, what went down here, it was not that the U.S. should have a big military buildup in Afghanistan. It's bipartisan that we don't need that many people. This is about execution on the ground, and it's about dates that were given people. So I'll say what I am proud of, which is our U.S. military, but I'm certainly not proud of our execution at a senior level in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I don't want to harp too much on. We saw what Biden's choices were, even if he doesn't acknowledge them. But go back to the Doha Agreement, something you were a big part of. What would you have foreseen as how this would have gone had President Trump won re-election, if the agreement had been the path forward?
So the Doha Agreement wasn't some kind of blank agreement that we were leaving by this date. There were a whole bunch of conditions in the agreement. And so here's what we can all agree on. Large amounts of troops in Afghanistan weren't working. Again, bipartisan view. Then there's a question of how we were getting attacked while we were down there, and how do we save the lives of our service members. And what the Doha Agreement is, it stopped all attacks on U.S. troops the day after it was signed. And it had a number of very clear conditions. Those conditions were not satisfied. And so one of the things you always think about is you base a withdrawal not on a date. It's based on conditions. That agreement had conditions. They were not satisfied. So we would not have left if U.S. citizens and Afghans that had helped our military were not safe.
So under that agreement, and saying that what you saw, those conditions were not satisfied. So President Trump is president. You all are helping coordinate this. We get into the summer of 2021. There's 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. Would the move have been to put 5,000 more? Could President Trump had stopped this from happening with 2,500 troops? What's the disparity there?
The disparity is that you need to do anything you can to stop something like this. And so at the end of the day, the conditions that have to be ready, if you're going to be out of there eventually, you have to evacuate folks. Now, let's keep in mind, until days before, there was no clear sign that what was going to happen was going to happen. In fact, we didn't even have a count of the number of people we were going to evacuate. We thought the number of people we were going to evacuate were 1/10 the amount of people that we actually had to evacuate. You're talking...
Did you hear what he said?
And that what was going to happen was going to happen. In fact, we didn't even have a count of the number of people we were going to evacuate. We thought the number of people we were going to evacuate were 1/10.
Did you hear what he said?
Count of the number of people we were going to evacuate. We thought the number of people we were going to evacuate were 1/10 the amount of people that we...
Now, where does that begin at? That begins at the top. That begins with the White House, and it begins with the Pentagon. Your 5- and 4-star generals that obviously took this in a completely wrong direction. And listen to the rest of what he has to say.
Actually had to evacuate. You're talking tens of thousands of people versus 1,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people. So to be clear, there was no view on the ground from that perspective. And so you don't press go unless you're ready.
Well, it looks like in the end result, you're probably wise to negotiate with Taliban rather than the Afghan government because they obviously didn't have any interest in fighting for their country. Things
just to bring up something on that,
out.
Joey. Yeah, to your point, Joey, let's look at the stark contrast between President Ghani in Afghanistan and President Zelensky.
We've got to leave it
in
here.
Ukraine.
Unfortunately, we got to leave it here. I do want to get you back on, and I want to talk more about this. This is an hour-long conversation. Maybe we'll hit it 3 minutes at a time. Thank you.
You got it, Joe.
All right, coming up, Vice President Kamala Harris heads to Tennessee.
They had to get a bullhorn to be heard. Well, you know what? That happens in a democracy, too.
We'll speak to State Representative on what Harris left out of her speech next.
In 3 seconds, this couple will share a perfect moment.
And I want to weigh in on what you just said about the bullhorn. Whenever I was up in Waverly, Tennessee, Humphreys County, after they almost costed me my liberty pertaining to them getting on the airwaves pertaining to their police force radio transistors, and they must have somehow or another got the idea that I was completely, totally out of my mind just because I went into a prepper station and told them a little bit about my testimony. They actually come out here with my probation officer, her supervisor, and another deputy of making demands that if I did not go to a psychiatric doctor and get pre-approved that I was all right to be out here in the eyes of the general public, that it would be looked upon as being a violation of my probation and that I would be standing back in front of a judge. And I hadn't a bit more broken the law than the man on the moon. All I did was go into a prepper station where they sell all kinds of different prepping stuff for preppers, getting ready kind of like the Davidians, Branch Davidians, getting ready for the sky to basically fall. And once I got in there, I didn't purchase a thing. Didn't buy not one thing. Maybe that's what upset them. But what got to me is whenever they come out here, so like a few weeks later, I got to thinking about it, and I said, well, you know what, I'm going to go protest that. So I went up there and I got to talking, and apparently I was talking too loud. I didn't even have a bullhorn, to the point that their police up in Waverly told me that they had an ordinance pertaining to sound, and once the decimals got so loud that you could be on the other side of the road and you could hear somebody talking, that you could be charged that way. So I realized what they was doing. So basically what I done was come back about a week or two later and started walking around with signs, and I took a orange piece of duct tape and put over my mouth. But that's the way the people in Tennessee do it. Whenever it comes to democracy, you really don't have no free democracy here, because the old heads, the old money, their old way of thinking, they're the ones that's in power, and they're the ones that want to remain in power. And as far as I'm concerned, they are so offbeat, not only in political affairs, but also spiritual affairs, in towards interpreting the Bible correctly, that's one of the reasons why that we're in the shape that we're in right now. I blame idiocy because of where we are right now. That and just plain hardcore stubbornness. People that will refuse to accept different people's perspectives on different angles, regardless whether it's a perspective on the Bible or it's a perspective on running things effectively and efficiently in a state or in a county.
It's about whose voices they were channeling. A democracy says you don't silence the people. You do not stifle the people. You don't turn off their microphones when they are speaking about the importance of life and liberty. They had to get a bullhorn to be heard.
And I never did have a bullhorn.
Happens in a democracy too.
And I never did have a bullhorn.
That was Vice President Kamala Harris making a surprise trip to Nashville, Tennessee last night, where she praised the so-called Tennessee Three for their role in a protest on the House floor.
State Representative Andrew Farmer was one of the lawmakers who introduced resolutions to expel those colleagues. He joins us now. Representative, thank you for being with us. There is a lot of talk about the motivations of Republicans in Tennessee. There have been accusations of racism as to why the two black men were expelled and the white lady representative was not. There has been questions about personal animus. Tell us in your own words, please, why were those two Tennessee reps expelled?
And thank you for that question. I think we need to start here. Let's talk about our government first. Let's think about the three co-equal branches of government. We have the executive.
Typical politician, not answering the question. He's wanting to go around the question with basically how he's highlighting things. Why can't he just answer the question? Because he knows what they done was wrong. What they done was a violation of our Constitution. Just like whenever Homeland Security got involved with the Windmill Ministries missions in 1989, whenever I first stood out into the eyes of the public and got Madison County to engage into an arrest and charging me with a deadly weapon, even though the sword that I had at the time was locked into a case, and it was as dull. It was so dull it wouldn't even cut hot butter hardly. It was made out of aluminum. It was something that you would hang on the wall to maybe, look at. It was something to look at. It sure wasn't a weapon. I mean, if you're going to charge me for a weapon of having something like that, well, you're going to charge me for a weapon because I have a broomstick in my hand. Or I have a number 3 skillet in my hand. Or I have a 2x4 in my hand. Or a hammer in my hand. If you're going to charge me for a weapon of a sword that don't even have an edge to it, don't you think that's going a bit too far? Well, this is what the people in our legislation has been a part of now for years and years and years, towards basically dominating their citizens. And this is one reason why that our country is so upside down right now. And this is the point that I continue to keep telling people around here that could have initiated some sort of support for the Windmill Ministries, because the Windmill Ministries supported not just the teachings of Christ pertaining to the salvation, but also the teachings of the Bible pertaining to end-time biblical Bible prophecies. Because they didn't like the message, they took it out on the messenger. And man, was I ever thrown out on a limb to dry. And they still wondered, or still scratching their heads wondering, well, we didn't have nothing to do with that. You had everything to do with that. That's the part that they are in denial of, kind of like your climate deniers. It was the climate deniers that started right here in Tennessee 20 some odd years ago with Al Gore that helped put us where we are right now towards seeing this a radical forces of nature that's now ravaging our nation again and again and again. Listen to what he's got to say.
That'd be the President of the United States or the Governor of the state of Tennessee. What would happen if a member of Congress or a member of the state legislature in Tennessee went to the governor's office with a bullhorn or the president's office, started banging his desk saying, "We've not been heard. We want something done"? I believe the Secret Service would have those folks put in jail or be removed from the government.
And he's right. He's absolutely correct. Using that particular example, if it was normal circumstances over a normal argument or debate, he's right. But this is not normal in seeing how long that this gun violence has went on. And whenever you have something that hadn't been addressed properly, you're going to have people that's going to have strong emotions. This is another area that the people in the state of Tennessee, as far as legislation, don't get. The fault falls upon the feet of those that was in control of these areas that chose to be lax, that is let it fester and fester and fester to the point of where we are today.
Let's think about the judicial branch. We have the Supreme Court of the United States. We have the Supreme Court of Tennessee. What if, as a lawyer, as I am, I feel like the judge isn't hearing me the way I want him to hear? I go to the podium with a bullhorn, start banging the desk, saying, "Judge, you're not hearing me. I don't feel like I'm being heard." What do you think is going to happen then? I'm going to be ruled out of order, maybe held in contempt, removed from the courtroom. Now let's move to the third branch of government. Let's think about the United States Congress. Let's think about the Congress in the state of Tennessee, the Tennessee General Assembly. What if a member of the United States Congress thought, "Well, I don't think I'm being heard. I'm going to go down to the podium, right in front of where the speaker sits, pull out my bullhorn, start banging on the desk on that bullhorn." What's going to happen to that member or members? They're going to be removed. And that's all we did. We were conducting business that Thursday.
Those examples that he just gave are true examples under the pretense of normalization. What's going on right now in our country pertaining to gun violence is not anything that comes close to normal. This is not normal. And I think what them guys done and that gal done, them two guys and that gal done, I think that they should be, that you should put, they should win awards over this. They should get trophies and awards and medals and all the above, because somebody finally had enough nerve to do the right thing.
Presenting their bills for their 70,000 plus constituents apiece, these members decide, "Hey, we think we're going to be above the rules of this chamber. We're going to get together at Representative Johnson's desk, who is a senior member." Let me tell y'all, this is very important. She's a senior member. She's been there as long as I have, probably 10 years. Gets two freshman members, brings them to the podium. Just as a member's presenting a bill, the microphone's on. They start yelling into the microphone because there's a crowd of people there because of a tragedy. A tragedy. There's a crowd of people, but they felt like they're above the rules and the things they need to do and how you need to do it. They thought, well, we're going to start banging the desk. We're going to get our bullhorn out and start inciting these people who are here for good reason. Good reason. They're here protesting for good reason. But instead, what we had that day was professional protesters as members of our body exercising their protesting ability when they need to be following the rules of the House. They were gavelled down by the speaker. They were asked multiple times, "Please return to your seats. Please return to your seats."
Once more, taking things out of proper context in regards towards the emergency affairs with all our children that's being slain. If all those examples that he just got through talking about was normal examples, I'd say, you know what, you're absolutely correct. But because this has festered and it has went as long as it has went without getting some sort of reform, I think it's time for somebody to get loud. I think it's time for somebody to maybe get a little out of hand.
For Democratic leadership, Karen Camper, who I have a lot of respect for, Joe Towns, all those folks I work very well with and I always have. They go out there, and if you watch the end of that video, you'll see a lady telling them, get back. You get out of the well, back to your seats, and that's the Democratic Minority Leader Karen Camper had to remove them from the well.
Representative, I watch a lot of sports. It's almost always the second punch, the second push, the reaction that people see and hone in on. I understand exactly what you're saying. I appreciate the civics lesson on how this translates into national politics. Right. But the end result is that everyone in the country is focused on the Tennessee state legislature, and the optics are that a bunch of white men took out 2 black men from their legislature. How do you all rebound from that? How do you get what you believe to be the truth out? You believe you're right and correct in what you did, and most importantly, how do you respond to what happened in Nashville and what legislation, how do you go back to doing the business that you're there to do?
Well, my response is this, and yes, I did give a civics lesson because I think it's important for the public to understand how government works and how our body works, how the Tennessee General Assembly works. It works with order. It works with rules. You take order and rules out, it doesn't work. Government doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, these are people who don't care about the government. This is the ends justify the means, Gen Z, Marxist, indoctrinated young people, and it's shameful that they're being reinforced by our own vice president and White House with an invitation to the White House.
It's shameful that it has went this far, this long, without somebody getting a handle on this. The shame falls upon to the legislation of the state of Tennessee and all the states that has not moved appropriately in handling this problem. That's where the shame begins. Now, they're going to try to turn the shame around towards the people that's getting loud or the people that's getting a little out of hand in their protest, and that ain't where the shame belongs. The shame belongs once more to the legislation body that has not performed correctly in solving the problem.
Well, we just occupied the well just for a few minutes. Well, hey, I just broke the law just for a few minutes. Is it okay? Can you let me go?
Yeah. Well, they're enablers, and they like it, and they want it, and they want more of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Still ahead on Fox and Friends Weekend, wokeness gets greasy. Tom Brady dating rumors, and will Prince Harry and Meghan attend the court?
Now, I want to use an example real quick. Let's say that I'd made several calls because my roads was tearing up, and I knew for a fact that the bridge down here needed to be addressed. And I'd done called up my county road representative several different times, and I couldn't get nothing done. And then all of a sudden, because I know that this bridge is unsafe, I still can't get nobody down here to look at it or to address the problem. Now I go up to Nashville and I get a little bit ill, okay, because I'm trying to save people's lives. And then all of a sudden I get thrown in jail. I get punished. So what it amounts to is what the state of Tennessee was doing. They was punishing the messengers. And because they didn't like the message more so than their body of rules, they decided that they was going to show them how the cow was going to eat the cabbage. It goes right back to the very same thing that I've been trying to put forth for the past 30 plus years in the name of the Windmill Ministries missions. Because they didn't like the message, they took it out on the messenger. Just so happens what you've seen on TV with the Tennessee legislation up there, it was 3 of them, but basically they all 3 had the exact same message. It's time that we do something. Kind of like somebody that continues to keep calling, the bridge is going to fall, the bridge is going to fall. And then you're going to get mad at the person that's bringing you the message? Is that not beating a horse on the wrong end? And that's exactly what the American people have seen again and again and again coming from our legislation, regardless whether it's our Tennessee legislation or any other state legislation, much less our federal legislation. We have seen this again and again and again. And you wonder how come people are getting emotional. You wonder how come people are getting a little loud. You wonder how come people are getting a little disorderly. I didn't even get disorderly whenever I was in Humphreys County, Waverly, Tennessee, and I was still mandated. I was still basically chastised or reprimanded by their police officers there towards pulling up and saying, you know what, buddy, you need to calm it down, you need to tone it down, or we're fixing to come out here with handcuffs. Well, what was that telling me? That was telling me that I did not have a right to expose that in which what they had done previous towards getting on the horn and getting my probation officers out here to the extent that I almost went to jail again. The first time I went to jail was being concerned over 3 little children. And now I'm going to go to jail because I walked into a department store. You may call it a department store. It was a store that sold all kinds of axes and hatchets and water supplies and all kinds of stuff that survivalists would use. And because I exposed part of my story, the guy in there supposedly freaked out, and the next thing you know, I got the law knocking on my door. Didn't like the message. Well, let's attack the messenger. I go to Kenton, Tennessee in 1983 after I got physically attacked. I'm holding up a sign, SOS, SOS, help, help, help. And the type of help that I got was, we're going to institutionalize you. In the meantime, we're going to pat your father on the back and tell him what kind of good job that he done. But if the truth be known, they was probably pissed off at him because he didn't go ahead and finish me off. Now, that's the type of resistance movement that some of the American sovereign citizens have been going through for the past 40 plus years. Because that was in 1983. This is in the year 2023. You do the math. That was 40 years ago. Since then, it has snowballed. I have been attacked again and again and again. And they want to talk about anti-Semitism because it is so apparent now all over the country. Well, guess who started it? The Christians. Guess who crucified Jesus yesterday pertaining to Good Friday? It was the believers. It wasn't the non-believers. It wasn't the hobo. It wasn't the prostitute. It wasn't the gypsy. It wasn't the rambler. It was those that already had a sense of belief, and because they didn't like the message coming from the messenger, they figured out, well, the only way we're going to shut this individual up is just to kill the messenger because we don't like the message. Well, guess what? The message still lived. It still lived. If anything, they done just the very thing that they shouldn't have done, was by turning Jesus into a martyr by killing him the way that they did. They've done the exact same thing over in Tennessee with Martin Luther King. They done the same thing in other people that tries to come in here and do the right thing. They want to push them off the cliff, just like them 2 guys and that 1 girl. They wanted to push them off the cliff because they didn't like the message. Didn't have nothing to do with rules, because I've heard them get in there and argue and bicker and get hot under the collar with one another because somebody really had strong feelings about wanting to pass some sort of a law. I've heard them get in there and basically, and you think that we're bad. Look at over there in Europe. Look at over in the UK. And how that they perform their democracy over there. You talk about getting loud. Oh my God, you would think that they're fixing to get down into a knockdown, drag out sometimes the way that they argue about stuff over there. The bottom line is certain people in Tennessee legislation is still wanting to rule the roost, and they're not wanting to adapt. They're not wanting to mature. They're not wanting to grow and come about in society, of the society that we live in. And because of it, they're still using old primitive methods towards shutting people up and making them sit down and treating them like they're little kids, or just don't listen to them at all. Okay, ignore me. That's fine. Ignore me. In the meantime, I'm seeing a bloodbath happen on the streets, just like I had told the 43rd president of the United States whenever I sent him a T-shirt in 2005 while living in Davidson County of a bloody road ahead. In other words, the various stuff that I told the president about that's now going on 18 years, 17 plus years, is the very thing that is happening. And if they don't watch, it's even going to intensify and even grow worse. Because whenever you have a society that is this far out in left field, to the point that can't nobody get nothing done, regardless whether you're Republican or Democrat, then you have a failed State of the Union. You have a failed system. That was the whole primary reason why that my younger brother David and myself put the cross up out here, indicating that the cross had been broken. The system had been broken. Because the cross in the Roman days was part of their system that they used to maintain law and order. Whenever you have a country that can no longer maintain any type of order, then you're prone of seeing more and more storms or pandemics or wars or bloodshed on the streets, or being $30+ trillion in debt, or seeing 1 million+ people coming over to our country illegally every year. Illegally every year.
As well on how the U.S. is responding to China's threats there, not just on the military front, but increasingly on the economic front too. And while tensions rising there, crime spiking here. Meet the Florida sheriff with a direct message: hold criminals accountable no matter how young. Marion County Sheriff Billy Woods is here. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto. We've got a busy show for you. Obviously, taking a look at the developments in Taiwan and around Taiwan, because we've never seen a military buildup quite like this. And it's worrying others who say that it doesn't take much for someone to pull a trigger. And
sounds like another deal like what went on with Russia. They was using the excuse, well, this is just a military exercise. This is just a military exercise. And the whole time he knew that it wasn't even close to being a military exercise. China has already said what they're going to do to that country over there. And if you don't take it the way that it needs to be taken in the right form, it's nobody's fault but your own. In other words, the leader over in Ukraine, Davinsky or whatever his name is, it wasn't until about the last 24 hours is whenever he finally realized, my God, this is really going to be an invasion, isn't it? You have been tricked. There you go. The Trojan horse. You thought it was a gift at first, but now it's turned out to be what? Your Achilles heel. And the very same thing may happen to the people over there in Taiwan. It could very well be their Achilles heel if it's not handled properly on the front end, pertaining to the Pentagon and those that make these type of calls. I'm not a war analyst. I really ain't. I'm everything to do with peace instead of war. But I am intelligent enough. My brother and I was intelligent enough in 2015 whenever we seen Russia heading towards the North Pole with all that equipment and all that manpower, and they asked them, well, what are y'all doing up here? And their excuse was, oh, we're looking for a different trading route. Well, apparently wasn't nobody smart enough to figure out if they're looking for a new trading route, apparently something's fixing to happen with the old trading route. Now, what's going to happen to the old trading route pertaining to them getting what they get from the Black Seas over there? Bingo. We got people that's operating and running things that still to this day are not within the reason of reality. And whenever you have that, you're going to have another 9/11. And if it don't come in that same form, it will come in other forms, because the Bible's very clear that we have an adversary that is out to steal, kill, and destroy.
Trigger, and maybe trigger a war. Let's get the latest right now from Aisha Hasni in Taiwan. Aisha.
Hey, good morning to you, Neil. Good to see you. And you can see for yourself here in Taipei on the ground that people are going about their daily lives despite the fact that China is flexing its military muscle less than 100 miles away. And we actually have brand new video of those military drills. Let's go ahead and take a look. As you mentioned, a stunning 71 Chinese Army jets and 9 Navy ships have entered the Taiwan Strait as China's People's Liberation Army launches 3 days of military drills. About 45 of these jets, Neil, are crossing that median line and even going into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. It is happening presumably in response to that big meeting between President Tsai and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy earlier this week, and of course the bipartisan delegation visiting with Tsai in Taipei during their 3-day visit to the island. House Foreign Affairs Chairman Michael McCall telling Fox News the goal of this trip was to rally ally support in the Pacific and try to deter a Chinese invasion. But he says if that were to happen, sending U.S. troops is not out of the question. McCall telling me why it is so critical right now for Americans to support Taiwan.
90% of the advanced semiconductor capabilities for the world in manufacturing exists right here in Taiwan. If that is compromised in any way, it's a strategic asset, a national security asset. If that is taken over by invasion or it's broken, it will send this globe into a world of hurt and a global depression.
And Neil, lawmakers told me right before they left the island that as soon as they get back to Capitol Hill, their #1 priority is to expedite getting those weapons that Taiwan already bought years ago, finally getting those weapons to them as quickly as possible. Neil?
Thank you for that, Aisha. Please get home safe. Aisha in Taipei, Taiwan. Now reaction from the White House, how they're addressing all these fast-moving developments. Lucas Tomlinson is there. Lucas.
Well, Neil, those 71 Chinese fighter jets also included nuclear-capable bombers. Now, here at the White House, John Kirby tried to calm things down before leaving for the Easter weekend.
Lines of communication with China remain open. We have communicated to China privately. We've certainly done it publicly here with y'all, that there's no reason for them to overreact to this transit. It's not uncommon for these transits to happen. They're private, they're unofficial. We would urge China not to overreact.
Talking about the visit from those lawmakers, of course, there, Neil. Now is the hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan that dominated the press briefing Thursday after the White House released that 12-page summary report, largely blaming the Trump administration for the debacle. U.S. officials say 19,000 Afghans are still waiting for visas to enter the United States, many languishing in refugee camps after helping U.S. military for years. Some Democratic lawmakers, including a Marine combat veteran, are joining Republicans in saying part of the blame for the chaotic withdrawal belongs with the current commander-in-chief.
I don't think it's enough to just blame the previous administration. This is the commander-in-chief. He's responsible for what his administration does, and clearly they did not start this evacuation soon enough.
Now, there's another finding from that report as well, Neil. Now, in the Middle East today, the Navy announcing the guided missile submarine USS Florida, armed with up to 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles, transited the Suez Canal Friday, heading to the Red Sea, following recent attacks on U.S. forces in Syria that killed an American contractor and wounded many American soldiers. Now, coupled with the war in Ukraine, plenty on the White House's plate overseas. Happy Easter, Neil.
Yeah,
to you as well, my friend. Thank you for that update. Lucas Tomlinson at the White House. Now to the former Defense Secretary of the United States, Dr. Mark Esper, with us right now. Secretary, good to have you back.
Hi, Neil. Good to be with you.
You would know the history of this era far better than I, sir. So I don't recall, I don't want to call it a military buildup, but a military presence so sweeping on the part of China around Taiwan. Do you, and what do you make of it?
Well, I think if you look operationally, if you will, in the last 12 months, we did see a bigger buildup last summer when Speaker Pelosi traveled to Taiwan. I was there in Taipei just a couple weeks prior, and I think they had 7 days worth of exercises, and they were threatening this and that. But when you step back to a point you made earlier, Neil, China is clearly building up its military. It's now has the largest navy in the world. It has the largest army. It is increasing the size of its nuclear forces fourfold by the year 2035. They have made clear that by 2035, they want to have a modern military. And their goal is to move beyond the Indo-Pacific and really project power around the world. And we should be concerned about that.
What are the rules on the so-called median line in the Taiwan Strait then, Secretary? Because China, with at least 29 aircraft and considerably more since that was posted this morning, has crossed it repeatedly on the northern, the southern side, but again and again. What are the consequences for that?
It's not so much the consequences, it's the fact that they are provoking them. They are deliberately provoking them, hoping that Taiwan will retaliate, and then they would be able to use that as an excuse towards a full invasion. And if you can't read that, like I said, I'm not a war analyst. I'm not a Winston Churchill or Colin Powell or Rumsfeld or none of those other big analysts. But if you can't read the handwriting on the wall towards what's happening here, then obviously you're either blind in one eye and can't see out of the other, or you just don't have the capability of understanding what they're doing. They want to take over that industry. They want to take over that silicon industry, and they feel like that they got the raw end of the deal whenever it comes to what Taiwan done and how Taiwan branched out and got away from China. The same way that these authoritarian countries, and I'm just going to use Russia for an example, feels like that they got the short end of the deal, that they got cheated. So what we have here is basically a pandemic, a cancer, and it's spreading. The opinion, the attitude, the whole concept of we're the biggest, baddest one on the block. The whole initiative of trying to be, I don't forget now how they phrase it whenever Ronald Reagan finally accomplished what he done in strength with power, or power with strength, or something like that. You can pretty well blow that out of the water anymore, because it's done been proven that the church world over here does not want to support the Windmill Ministries missions, because either they do not like, I just put it this way. I've heard others around here say that I, Dennis James Jackson, was trying to usher in the millennium. And that's the part that they don't understand. It's not got nothing to do with me, or I. This was an appointed, anointed message coming from the main messenger, which is the Father, that I was given the responsibility towards putting it out to the people. The people, if they would have been responding and reacting the way that they were supposed to have been, especially those that has the same faith, that tells me that they're looking forward to leaving this world and going to heaven and living with the Lord. Well, you're not going to do that in the physical form. You're going to have to do that in the spiritual form. Between two things. A, the people over here in America was under the influence of that movie that come out years and years ago, Towards the Day After, whenever all the airplanes was falling out of the sky and it was total chaos, that basically everybody was instantaneously going to vanish. And that was basically whenever God was going to start the tribulation, was whenever everybody vanished. That was Christians, true born-again Christians. That sounds really, really good in theory, but in reality, that's not the way it's going to happen. I wish it was, but it's not the way it's going to happen. The book of Revelations was not written by me. That book was written, 70 years after the birth of Christ. And even Jesus told his disciples before they become apostles that I have stuff to give you that you cannot handle right now. I have stuff that I would like to tell you, but I can't tell you these things because you can't handle it right now. Well, obviously, these people 30 plus years ago couldn't handle what I was given to them, of that in which what was given to me to give to them. They couldn't handle it. Wasn't going to accept it, turned it down, spit on it, and then ridiculed, or better than that, set me up, framed me again and again and again towards making my life miserable. And boy, did they ever. Did they ever make my life miserable? And you wonder how come I say the things that I say? Like I'm not supposed to be human? I'm not a rock. I'm not a piece of wood. I'm not a stone. I'm human. I'm a human being. I got human feelings. I have put forth my best foot, and in reality, I put forth my hand and it got slapped back. Okay? The hand got slapped back. In other words, they didn't want my help. They didn't want my message, and it wasn't my message. It was God's message. And that's the part that the so-called church communities around here still cannot grasp. This did not have nothing to do with me self-appointing myself towards me telling people about the opening of the first seal and me meeting Satan, the form of the Antichrist that I'd heard about whenever I was just a teenager growing up in this area. This don't have nothing to do with me in that perspective. And of course, if you're going to continue to stay in denial, like the same group of people that was in denial whenever Moses was given the inspiration of doing what he was given to God about, then you're going to suffer the consequences for. Just like the people that didn't accept the message coming from the messenger pertaining to Noah. They suffered the consequences. The people over in Israel, Jerusalem, that didn't accept the things that Jesus Christ was telling them about, they suffered the consequences. And you know what? The same thing's going to happen to the USA that begins right here in Northwest Tennessee. And our Tennessee legislation body just got through proving it towards how hard-headed and how set that they are towards wanting to basically attack the messenger because they didn't like the messages. Well, if you would have done something about the problem a long time ago, nobody would have had to have gotten loud. Nobody would have had to have gotten a little bit out of hand. Nobody would have had to have gotten a horn to be able to talk over the crowd after they'd killed the mic. One action requires another action. I think it was Einstein or somebody that said forever action is a reaction. I mean, I didn't get a whole lot of education growing up in school because I was going through what I was going through here on the farm and pertaining to a World War II drill sergeant that had basically thought that he could rule the roost around here and wasn't nobody going to mandate him or reprimand him for him doing what he was doing. So in reality, my father was sick, right? My dad was sick. But don't you think those that could have stepped in or at least made a telephone call to have contacted the right authorities, just like my brother and I did whenever we contacted the Child Abuse Center in downtown Nashville and Davidson County, and then we contacted the Child Abuse Center right here in Weakley County? Don't you think that they could have done that at least? So you got to look at it from my perspective, which is, well, who was the sickest? Was it my dad that done those things openly in grocery stores, in banks, right in the middle of town square? It didn't matter if he was down here at the local store, if he was in a field. It didn't matter if he was at your house or somebody else's house. He would literally fly off the bat and go plumb crazy in his discipline tactics, while the rest of the community backed up and got scared. Like Miss White, Ed White's wife said, well, Juby, we wasn't going to get our brains knocked out. And then there was another comment, well, all it would have done was caused y'all to go live in a foster home somewhere. Well, what's wrong with that? As long as you're getting out of the hand of the brutality that's going on in your life towards you being able to think straight. Whenever I would get off the bus, I had basically 15 or 20 minutes, 30 minutes to eat, suck down 2 ding-dongs, drink a glass of milk, watch a little bit of Star Trek, and get my tail out across the road and start doing whatever that was required for me to do. I wasn't asked to do it. I was ordered to do it. And if we did not do it, we suffered the consequences for not doing it. We didn't backtalk our fathers. We didn't backtalk him and tell him how we felt, because if we did, we would have wound up with our teeth knocked out of our throat. And it wasn't just me that was being treated that way. There was a whole lot of people in this area that was being treated that way because they had went overboard with their discipline tactics, and that was acceptable during the 60s and the 70s and the biggest part of the 80s. Now, out in California, I'm pretty sure all that stuff probably stopped even back in the 50s, maybe the 60s. In your bigger cities, in Chicago and Philadelphia and other cities, I'm pretty sure that all that stuff stopped. Why? Because them people was ahead of the game, and they knowed that you can be too strong by going overboard. That would actually do just as much damage as it would have been if you didn't do nothing at all. Well, that's what society's done now. They have turned, and now you can't even look at little Johnny without having a truant officer come to your front yard, or having a probation officer come to your front yard. You can't even voice your opinion no more. And whatever you do, don't be working for the state body pertaining to legislation and stand up for all the gun violence pertaining to the death of innocent children. Now, whenever we as a society have become that bass backwards, then we as a society are no longer going to be protected under the hand of God whenever it comes to the masses. Now, you wonder what's happening? You know, they want to reflect the concept, well, it ain't the guns that's killing people. No, it ain't the guns. It's the people in behind the guns. But you know what? We have certain requirements that it would be the same thing if everybody was taking their automobiles out here and they was purposely running into crowds and killing people. We would take their privileges away, or we'd lock them up to make sure that they didn't do that again, because they would be looked upon as being a danger to society. You got to be qualified to have an automobile, to operate an automobile, because an automobile can be weaponized. We've seen that again and again throughout parades and other things. Same way with guns. You should be qualified to operate a firearm the same way that you should be qualified to operate an airplane or a car or an 18-wheeler or even a combine, a tractor. And if you're not qualified, if you haven't proven yourself in these qualifications, you get your qualifications taken from you. Having your driver's license isn't something that is mandated for you to have. It's something that you got to earn. It is a privilege. And it should be looked upon the same way pertaining to all the guns, especially the military style guns. It should be hands down. It should have been hands down 10 years ago of them moving in legislation either through every state or through the federal government. It should have been hands down 10 years ago. Well, that's kind of like global warming. We're only just now waking up to global warming on an international level, and we should have been waking up to global warming whenever Al Gore was putting out all the data proof. whenever the proof was out there. Because people like Al Gore was looking in the basically the crystal ball, and he had access to all this different information going on all over the world. And because of it, he was analyzing things and telling people, you know what? It's coming. It's coming. Just like the British. They're coming. They're coming. The environment's changing. The environment's changing. We're going to see consequences on account of it. But yet, no, you don't want to hear that. Okay. So it reached a point in time in my life at the age of 62. Well, I tell you what I'll do. I'll do just like Jesus done. Whenever Jesus went up into the mountain and looked down upon to the people in Jerusalem and said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I have accomplished thee as a hen that would gather up her chickens, but ye would not listen. I truly believe that at that point in time, Jesus realized that he was not going to be able to rally the people in performing in the Christianity movement the way that he wanted to. And at that point in time, I think that Jesus knew that the only thing that was left for him to do was to walk down the aisle of crucifixion and die for all a man's sins. There was no other ultimatum. Because once more, the believers, those that already had a form of religion, was not going to have this individual telling them how that they was supposed to believe and think and pray and etc. Especially whenever it come into their finances. And that's basically what caused the death warrant to be put out on Jesus on Passover whenever he went into the temple. And he frightened them. He showed forth a little bit of anger, even though he didn't physically harm nobody, because they was looking for an excuse. Now they had it. Well, you know what? Jesus knew that that's what they was waiting for. Because Jesus knew that whenever he went up on top of that mountain and he looked down and he said to his Father, Father, I have gathered them together as a hen would gather her chicks, and they would not listen. So at that point in time, there was really no other logical explanation for what was going on and what was going to have to go on. Once more, it was the people that brought that upon to themselves. It was the people that brought that upon to themselves. The same way with now here in America. You can walk around and you can blame this one, you can blame that one, you can blame all the above. But the bottom line is it's all our faults. And the saddest thing about it is our children that's being treated this way right now. But what they're going to have to inherit after we're all dead and gone, God only knows what kind of thorny issues that they're going to have to deal with after we're all dead and gone, that they're basically going to inherit that they did not deserve. Once more, the State of the Union, the system has let them down. Who was the State of the Union? The adults, the baby boomers, the ones that's already been successful, but the ones that sat back and allowed for all our jobs to leave us and to go in strange lands because we was more susceptible in raising the debt ceiling, giving out stimulus checks, and buying things in all these retail stores that we only look at or use once or twice and then throw it off into the closet or our attics and never look at it again. Whenever Mr. Pence, the vice president, spoke and said mistakes have been made, you have no idea what type of mistakes and how many of those mistakes have been truly made here in America ever since they decided to do what they decided to do by not doing what they should have done in 1988. I cannot be forceful enough by saying that. I cannot say it enough times. I cannot say it enough with passion and loyalty. And that was where America decided to take a left turn instead of a right. We have no one but our politicians to blame for that. Those that has now fattened their checkbooks, Dick Cheney's, the Bushes, all those that was associated with the media back then, those was the ones that has caused us to be where we are today. But that speaks volumes about their faults. Now let's bring it up 30 plus years later into where we are today. And now let's look at our faults. To this day, as far as I know, I'm still looked upon by the community as either being a fraud, a fake, a lunatic, a maniac, or all the above. Because nobody wants to do the right thing. And I guess because I'm a Christian, I'm supposed to sit back and not only take it, but like what they're scooping to me in giving out these false images. Oh, go ahead, hit me again. Go ahead, entrap me again. Go ahead, tell more lies on me again. Go ahead. The Bible does not say nowhere in the Bible that we're whenever we're to turn our cheek, that we're supposed to like it. There's nowhere in the Bible that says you were supposed to like it. It says to love thy enemies. And trust me, do I ever have enemies? They hadn't run me out. They hadn't run me out. You know why they hadn't run me out? It's not because I don't have means towards being able to go to other places. My God, I've been all over America. I know people in almost all 52 states. If I hadn't met them directly, indirectly, I've talked to them online or telephone or something. I know a lot of people. I've been to a lot of places. So what is motivating towards me staying here? Hope. The word hope. Hoping that the people will wake up. Hoping that there will be a revival. Hoping that they'll be able to awaken before it is too late. But every day that goes by, I continue to see the clock ticking backwards. It's running backwards. And every day that goes by, we get a little deeper in debt. Every day that goes by, we see all these outlandish things that's occurring with million plus illegal immigrants coming over here with all the drugs and the guns and all the above. Every day that goes by, something else out-tops something else. Like I said in one of my other videos, I really thought that the ordeal that happened down in Texas, where the police officers stood idly by for over an hour before they decided to engage into that situation with that shooter in that school, I really thought that that was the bottom of the barrel. But what went on in the state of Tennessee has absolutely broke my heart. And I didn't think that it could be beaten. But as far as I'm concerned, what went on with our legislation in the state of Tennessee pertaining to them doing what they done to those two individuals and then not doing it to the white lady, in which she stood just as guilty as the rest of them, only brings things to a deeper, darker level, even beyond what went on in Texas. And I'm talking about the ordeal that went on about a year ago. If you get to looking all the way back in 1992, what went on in Texas pertaining to the Branch Davidians and how basically they entrapped them poor people by selling them a bunch of military-style guns. And then after about 9 months, after setting up shop across the road, then deciding to attack them for the very guns that they had sold them, And even though they know that their cover had been blown, they still went ahead and pursued that. Only speaks volumes about what type of police force or legislation that we actually have here in America. And then whenever you get to looking at the fact that we're $30+ trillion in debt, can't build jails quick enough, letting basically criminals walk the streets, but yet no, they want to attack people like me. They want to crucify me whenever I step on a wooden nickel, but they'll let a rapist or somebody that gets caught with narcotics, they'll let them walk. It speaks volumes about the state of the union has failed the people. It is time for the people to take back over their country before we wind up being in some sort of major calamity like could possibly be boiling over right now over in China. And who knows who that they have buddied up with. I think they've already gotten cahoots with Russians and the people over in Iran and the people over in Saudi Arabia. So don't think for a second that this isn't planned. Just like it was planned with bringing all the military hardware and surrounding Ukraine. But our military analyst didn't take notice of it like my brother and I did in 2015 whenever they was looking for another trading route. They didn't put two and two together. So we know that they was coming. My brother and I did. So how come our CIA and our White House and our Pentagon did not know it? Or maybe they did know it. You know, you can only plead insanity for a certain length of time. You can only plead the fifth for a certain length of time. And then after that, people are on to you. They pretty well got it figured out for themselves. Even though they've been blinded, even though they've been bamboozled, even though they've been tricked, even though they've been deceived, eventually the people will come out of this. There will be a remnant. I continue to keep saying this. There will be a remnant that will come out of the ashes of whatever that we're going through or fixing to go through in regards towards this global instability. And you got to admit, it is global instability on every level imaginable. COVID has helped to accelerate what we're seeing and feeling right now and what we're going through, but I'm just afraid that we ain't seen or heard nothing yet. I'm just afraid that we ain't seen or heard nothing yet. Whenever you get to thinking about how that they look at us in a hypocritical state towards this guy that lives over there in Northwest Tennessee of the address at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, has been putting forth such of an effort for the past 30 some odd years, and every time he stands up, he gets knocked down. Every time he gets on a radio station or a TV station, he gets knocked down. Every time he goes somewhere, he gets knocked down because he don't have a support team or a group. He don't have a Joe Osteen congregation in behind him, 40+ people behind him. You wonder how come the Russians thinking that they got cheated? Could be a great deal of other nationalities out there or nations that believe the same thing. Hearing is one thing, but seeing is another. Them people in the other parts of the world, they're not stupid. They're not goat herders. These people are intelligent. But apparently they wasn't intelligent enough to know that the world was changing pertaining to global warming. And now, all of a sudden, everybody has walked out into the playing field understanding, oh my God, global warming is really real, isn't it? Yeah, it really is. Oh my God, there really is an energy shortage. Yeah, there really is. We got almost 7 billion people on the planet, and according to the statistics, give it another 10 or 15 years, there'll be another billion or two added on top of that. Yeah, things are entangled right now, and the global instability is on a level right now that exceeds the instability that was going on with the Cuban crisis. What we're seeing, what we're feeling, what we're what we're basically understanding of what's happening, regardless whether it's happening in Ukraine or it's happening with Iran or over in the Middle East or what we're seeing over there with China right now. If you put all of it together, including 9/11, realize we still got enemies that wants to take us down. They made a sworn pact in the early 90s that they was going to destroy Jerusalem, Israel, and America was going to be next. As far as I'm concerned, we have exceeded the danger level of where we was in the Cuban crisis. Especially whenever you get to looking at it from a domestic in-house deal towards all the violence and all the corruption and all the nonsense that has been going on for the past 30 plus years in our political arenas.
Everyone agrees that the Taiwan Strait is an international waterway. As such, international law says that you draw a line midway between Taiwan and mainland China, and that becomes the demarcation point between those two countries. And what we've seen over the last 2, 3, 4 years is China increasingly violating that rule and really pushing the boundaries of what's been acceptable over the previous decades. That's why I believe that we should respond to these Chinese provocations, maybe have more U.S. Navy deployments in the region. I think we definitely need to increase our training with the Taiwanese, but we need to push back on China trying to change international rules and norms.
You know, they get very close to just flying directly over Taiwan if they haven't already, and maybe they did at the time when you were there around the time of Nancy Pelosi's visit. But the fact of the matter is they've been flying fighter jets and firing missiles into the sea nearby pretty much on a daily basis. That doesn't leave much room for error.
Now look at how close they are to China, because China has made claims, the same thing as Russia has made claims, that they have been cheated, that whole body of land over there belongs to them, and they've already done said that there's going to be war pertaining to that incident over there. So, if you can't see the handwriting on the wall of what's happening here, and if our military personnel, as far as our Pentagon and the CIA, can't see what's going on here, then damn them all. Damn them all that has allowed for this situation to fester, just like the domestic problems that we're now dealing with here in America. This never ever should have gotten to the intensity to where it is right now. Never should have gotten here. This should have been dealt with appropriately and effectively, like I said, about 10 years ago or longer. But we've let it slide. We've let it fester. We've let it get out of hand to the point now that the only way to take it back, and I hate to use this analogy, but I'm going to use it. The only way to take it back is do like China done back in the 1800s, whenever they had such of an opium problem over there that they basically went around genociding the people that was either on the opium, or the people that was selling the opium, or the people that had anything to do with the opium. They genocided them people, and they buried them in large graves and buried them in bulldozers, and they got their message across to the rest of society that we was not going to deal with any more opium problems. And to this day, as far as I know, it hadn't got out of hand that way again. What did they have to do? They had to get ugly. They had to get uglier than the ugly that they was facing. And that's basically what America's going to have to do now. They're going to have to get uglier than the ugly that they're facing right now. And it's pretty obvious that the people in downtown Nashville and Davidson County still was not willing to look at the ugly, even though they had messengers there that day that was telling them about the ugly. So in response, what did Tennessee legislation do? They got even uglier towards attacking the messengers that was telling them about the ugly. Now, if that is not beating a horse on the wrong end, I will kiss your tail and give you 30 minutes to draw up a crowd. And that's exactly what the American people are, especially the adults, the leaders, including the preachers. They have been overlooking this stuff again and again and again. They've let it fester to the point of where we are right now. And only thing I can say is God help us all. May God have mercy on us all in what we're fixing to have to experience and what we're fixing to have to be a part of if we're going to turn it around before our own demise, before our own Achilles heel. America has been one of the most youngest, strongest nations in the world. And I guarantee you right now our ancestors is rolling around in their graves wondering how come they have been so lax. How come they didn't shut down all the borders the day after 9/11? How come they didn't get down to the bottom of just exactly who was financing all them terrorists, putting all the blame off on bin Laden, knowing good and well that it wasn't just bin Laden. It was a whole group of them over there that had made their minds up that this is what we're going to do to the Americans. And boy, did they ever do it. And to this day, justice, true justice, has still not been served on the people that masterminded 9/11. That our FBI and other people can prove that there is a link, a direct financial link coming from that country that was sponsoring, financing, and keeping all them terrorists up over here. Keeping them in motels, letting them eat, letting them be spies over here, training them how to fly airplanes, but wasn't none of them concerned about landing none of them down there in Florida. You talk about gaps. You talk about security gaps.
Small could turn out to be a huge mistake. Where does this possibly go?
And last year they made a strategic mistake last summer when they fired missiles that actually hit into Japan's exclusive economic zone. Right. And I think that was another straw that prompted Tokyo to make some bold decisions last year and say that they were going to double their defense budget in 5 years, and they were going to take on offensive strike capabilities, aligning far more closely with the United States. And by the way, Tokyo also recognized that the Chinese assault on Taiwan would affect our own security. So it's good to see more of our allies in the region recognizing the importance, the singular importance of Taiwan and the criticality of all of us, the Western nations, pushing back against this autocracy run by the Chinese Communist Party.
And if you think about it, Secretary, you and I chatted about this earlier, this idea of a rival currency that China is trying to shepherd together, working with countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Russia, even the so-called BRIC countries with Brazil. There's a move afoot right now to take the dollar out of being the sort of global reserve.
Why are they working with Brazil? You may be asking. Because Brazil is one of the biggest oil manufacturing companies compared to Saudi Arabia, that's basically the second below them. And the only reason why that we don't deal with them is because their refinement systems isn't near as good, and because of it, they basically got dirty fuel. But if you're talking about trying to invade a country or cause this much instability in the world on a global level, you're probably not going to be concerned that much about what you're putting in your Jeeps and your tanks just so that they run. So that's probably the reason why I'm just thinking this. Like I said, I'm not no war analyst. I'm not no Winston Churchill, but I'm just thinking that's probably the reason why that they're buttering up to Brazil down in there, because like I said, that area, South America, has the potential towards manufacturing, draining, and getting crude oil out of the ground and putting it in tanks and selling it as fuel. We don't do it because their manufacturing system is not as good.
Reserve currency. Now, a lot of people here then say, well, what's the big deal? Why is that a big deal?
Well, it would be a very big deal if somehow the RMB...
Let's back up. Let's hear what he's saying. I think he's talking about currency or something right there. Stop right there.
Communist Party.
And if you think about it, Secretary, you and I chatted about this earlier, this idea of a rival currency that China is trying to shepherd together, working with countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Russia, even the so-called BRIC countries with Brazil. There's a move afoot right now to take the dollar out of being the sort of global reserve currency. Now, a lot of people here then say, well, what's the big deal? Why is that a big deal?
Well, it would be a very big deal if somehow the RMB was to replace, which would never happen, or at least be a substitute, an alternative for the dollar, because then you would have so many of the world's transactions would happen through the RMB. It would limit our ability to sanction countries economically, financially, if you will. But look, it's never going to happen because nobody trusts the Bank of China. Nobody trusts the Chinese Communist Party to not manipulate their currency, not to play games with it. And so you can't have full faith and confidence in it. I mean, look, in the past year...
But if you start seeing masses amounts of people dying, and you start seeing hardships fall upon the other nations and countries, you may have a different opinion about that currency. I'm telling you, these people have got their eye on Taiwan for a reason. It's the exact same type of scenario that the Russians was pulling towards telling everybody this is just an exercise, knowing that we should have caught it right away within at least the first 60 days of what they was doing towards bringing in all that equipment over there. We should have caught it back whenever they was looking for a new trading route.
A year, 2 years alone, what Xi Jinping has done to his economy, he's pretty much decimated the tech sector, trying to reimpose state control. So all those things should give investors no faith or confidence little faith or confidence in the Chinese economy, let alone their treasury.
I have no doubt you're right about that.
Now, you keep in mind, that's his opinion about that. Okay? And his opinion may be on the money. I don't know. Everybody may feel the way that he says that they feel. But then again, he may be wrong about that. Everybody may not see it that way. Especially whenever you start having countries that's starving, like Libya. Whenever you have other countries that's basically just barely hanging on. Whenever you have all these imploding countries right now, of all this instability towards food, cargo, food not coming, supplies coming adequately to their doorstep like used to be. I've said all along that piracy is going to become a thing in the future. So far it hadn't happened yet, but piracy will be a thing in the future in places like over there in the Middle East, and I don't know, it could possibly be touching off in other areas, because once you start having people starving, you'll see their opinions and their attitudes change real quick. Real quick. You start taking the comforts that people has been accustomed to away from them, and you will see the true blue come out of them people quicker than a dog turning on you and biting.
But, money talks, and China's been spreading a lot of money around in the Middle East and trying to, shepherd, a peace agreement, not a peace agreement as much as ease hostility agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It's been pouring money into Africa and South America as well. All in an attempt, it would seem, not only to curry favor and poke a stick in the U.S.'s eye, but also maybe to get support for this rival currency, even a basket of currencies. Should we worry about the progress they're making?
Well, yeah, we certainly should. I mean, they've had this Belt and Road Initiative for several years, which is all about currying goodwill with countries around the world, particularly in Africa and Latin America, which should really concern us. Their aim is to have access to strategic materials like nickel and lithium and other things. And of course, they want to build ports and bases overseas. We've been very concerned, certainly during my tenure, about them trying to build a base on the western coast of Africa. But look, you're hitting on another point. They do throw money around. We often call it debt diplomacy because it ends up hurting the countries. And just this year, the Chinese, have increased their diplomacy budget by 12%, double-digit increase. So it tells you they're going to continue to push along this pillar of diplomatic outreach using the RMB as a tool to get their way.
Before we move on, I do want to address the fact that China's already announced sanctions against the Reagan Presidential Library, other organizations it says are not befitting hosting events that are anti-China. But it occurred to me that we will likely respond with sanctions of our own. We've already targeted a number of high-tech Chinese companies. They will no doubt then follow that up with going after a number of U.S. companies. Are we preparing the American people for the likelihood, if this escalates, things are going to get a lot more expensive? The goods they're used to buying, because it seems like everything's from China, will be hard to find and a lot pricier to buy.
Well, it never hurts in this context to increase the strategic talk about the threats we face from China. The director of the FBI has told us he's opening up an espionage investigation every 12 hours. We know that China is pushing its own propaganda here in the United States, particularly through our academic institutions. And so, look, on one hand, I think the administration's been weak in terms of supporting our own defense budget. This year they put forward
He talked about pushing the propaganda. That's exactly what Adolf Hitler done. Adolf Hitler, in the late 20s, early 30s, was already bringing people over here, trying to indoctrinate them in regards towards Aryanism. World War II just didn't begin overnight. World War II was planned. It was planned in procedure areas in what that they was going to do and how that they was going to do it. And basically, I'm seeing the same characteristics now out of China. Trying to brainwash people. Trying to bring their indoctrination over here. That way you'll have China sympathizers. That's what went on during World War II. Hitler was hoping that there would be Hitler sympathizers. And to this day, there are Aryan sympathizers that want to put Adolf Hitler on some sort of pedestal like he was some sort of a genius or he was some sort of a wizard of some sort, that he got the raw end of the deal. Once more, once you plant that seed starts growing. Those ideals start growing. I don't know if you know much about the history about what went on before World War II, but it was planned. It was deeply, effectively planned. And the only thing that stopped it was our ancestors was smart enough to figure it out and retaliate against it. Are we going to be smart enough this time to retaliate against it? Are we going to be smart enough to figure it out?
For a 3.2% increase, and yet inflation's above 5%. But on the other hand, they've done a pretty good job at continuing what we began in the previous administration of sanctioning Chinese companies and trying to gain some strategic autonomy, like was mentioned earlier on with regard to semiconductors and things like that. So we need to continue along this course and educate the American people.
But the American people have to be prepared that if we cut ties or drastically cut imports from China, things are going to get a lot pricier here. Is it worth that struggle?
It will. Look, I think when I talk about strategic decoupling economically, I'm talking about really high-end items. Now, look, I don't, if they want to sell us rubber doggy bones and shirts and sweaters, that's fine. But I think American companies are finally realizing it too. The good news is the American people typically poll very highly opposed to the Chinese Communist Party. I think we've long recognized what they're up to. But you're right, there is an economic cost to this, and that's just something we're going to have to, bite down hard on and accept.
Yeah, the reality of that is something that's going to have to be well telegraphed and well planned and prepared. We'll see what happens. Secretary, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, a good Easter. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Happy Easter to you too.
And of course, if that happens, like they're talking about, things will get tighter and things will become more severe over here pertaining to domestic terrorism or domestic violence. It'll get worse amongst couples, marriages, money will get tight, people's opinions change on one another, and it's just a bad, bad storm fixing to come over the horizon.
All right, the former Defense Secretary of the United States, Mark Esper. In the meantime, from a spike in, military concerns overseas, a spike in crime in the United States, the latest on that San Francisco entrepreneur's death, and what went down in Florida, tragically involving kids, and the people behind it, kids.
Gangs don't go to church on Sunday and then preach the gospel for the next 6 days. They're gangs because they commit crimes.
We're going to end it right there. A hard, bad state of affairs that you've just got to listening to. I just pray that whoever gets a hold of this video won't take it out of context, that they will be able to understand the things that are being discussed, either by myself or those that's on TV. These are not hypotheticals, my friends. These are not hypotheticals. These are actualities. These are realities. And like I was saying a while ago, if it does come down to the point that people are going to have to start tightening their belts, like they did during World War II, whenever they started rationing food and rationing rubber and rationing tires and rationing gas and rationing all this other stuff, dedicating it to the military and the first responders, if you think that things are not going to even increase pertaining to crime and outlandish behavior, you're only thinking the wrong thoughts, because I promise you it will get dire, not just in Chicago, not just in Atlanta or Memphis or St. Louis or Washington, D.C., but it will, or San Diego or wherever, it'll get outlandish everywhere. And our law enforcement needs to start preparing for this. They really do. Our courts and our law enforcement needs to start preparing for this. And if they don't, once more, it's another letdown. It's another failure from our State of the Union. Good luck to all of us. Want to say God bless you. God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless us where we go in our endeavors, especially looking at this global instability. Want to pray for the lonely, the sick, the abused, the used. Want to pray for our great nation. Pray for our leaders. Pray for those that have been victimized by all the ration of tornadoes and storms and the flooding, etc., that they've been going through here lately. Just want to pray for a calm that somehow or another, throughout all this, God's will be done, and that just as the Bible talks about, as far as the meek inheriting this earth in a spiritual revival that will elevate into a revolution without it being a bloodbath revolution, just want to pray that those things occur on a much more pleasant, softer level. than the harshness of what we just got through looking at and of the hypotheticals that we could be dealing with. Father God, on this Easter Sunday, I just want to pray, God, for all the children that are going through what they're going through right now, because, yes, crime has exceeded towards the younger generation not being parented correctly, feeling basically like foster children, or feeling like that they've been let down, and they have been by our system, by our laws, and by us not paying enough attention towards what was going on pertaining to our adversary. I just pray, God, that you, Lord, will lead us and direct us. Forgive us, God, of our sins and our trespasses, even as we forgive others that trespass against ourselves. Pray, dear Lord, that you, God, will lead us not into temptation, but you would deliver us from this evil. Just pray, Lord, for the elderly. Pray, God, for the weak. Pray, God, that there will be good, sound, strong decisions made that will pull us out of this storm that we're in right now, back into sunny, dry land. I just pray, God, that you will continue to watch over my son, watch over my family. Pray, God, that you will watch over this community. Pray, God, that you will watch over this great nation. Pray, Lord, for the innocent. Pray, Lord, for the ones that are being abused and used, regardless of what part of the sector of the world that they may be in. But most of all, we want to thank you for you showing your devoted love towards us in assigning Jesus Christ coming down in the human flesh and teaching us the righteous ways of living towards what we should do and what we shouldn't do. We want to thank you, Lord, for the salvation plan that has been given to us, because without that love and without that mercy and without that grace, we would all be tragically doomed. Thank you, Lord, for all that you've done. Thank you, Lord, for all that you're doing. And thank you, Lord, for all of that we believe that you're going to do. Though we know not what tomorrow holds, we do know that you hold tomorrow, and that your promises will be everlasting to everlasting. For you said that you would not leave us, abandon us, or forsake us, and that you would be with us even until the ends of the world. We know, Lord, pertaining to the signs, pertaining to the data facts, pertaining to the movements that we're seeing all over the world, that we are truly living in the final last days. I just pray, God, that there will be a sense of utopia or peace in regards towards the opening of the second seal, before that second horseman is opened or released according to your holy word. There's no way of taking peace from the planet unless there's peace upon the planet to take. And as of right now, 30 plus years later, since you have inspired me the way that you've inspired me, instead of us walking towards the pleasures of utopia and peace, we've actually been walking in the opposite direction. I just pray, God, for your divine grace, for your divine movement, that you will stir up the people, and that we will see a spiritual revival that will revolutionize not only America but the world, all in your glory and in your honor. In your glory and in your honor. Especially in the honor of your only begotten Son, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Thank you. God bless each and every one of you that listen or watch this particular Windmill Ministries missions footage, either on YouTube or Facebook. We want to thank you for your prayers, and God bless each and every one of you. Amen, and amen, and amen. And as I've said before, Happy Easter and Shalom.